Arizona Territory. Spring of 1882. The sun had only just broken over the Mule Mountains when they buried her baby boy. Fiona Langley stood alone by the small wooden cross, her hands trembling around the only blanket he had ever been wrapped in. Her husband had been gone nearly 2 years, disappeared into the desert with a bottle and a poker debt. The baby had come late and too weak. He had not lived past his 3rd day. No one said anything kind at the burial. No neighbors came. The preacher didn't even step off his buggy. Just read a line from the book of Job, then drove away like he had somewhere better to be. He did not look back. Poor Fiona. Ain't no use for a woman like that now, someone had whispered at the general store the day after. No child, no man, no kin. Useless. She heard it. They had not even tried to hide it. Fiona did not cry. Not then. Not during. Not after. She just went home to the small claim shack her husband had built before he vanished. She sat on the porch and watched the dry hills roll away into the horizon, her fingers curled around the edge of the blanket. Her body ached like it still remembered holding him. 3 days later, she packed what little she had and left. She followed the old stage road, walking east with blistered heels and a silence so thick in her chest she could not even pray. She slept under juniper trees, drank from cattle troughs, and kept walking. She did not know where she was going, only that she could not stay in the place where people looked at her like she was already dead. On the 7th day, her legs gave out. Somewhere between Bisbee and Tombstone, she collapsed by the edge of the trail, half-starved and sunburned, her lips cracked and bleeding. A horse stopped beside her. "You alive?" a deep voice asked. She blinked up, the sun behind his shoulder making his face hard to see. A tall man dismounted, lean-hipped, broad-shouldered, with a calm way of moving, like he had seen worse things than this and never rushed for any of them. "Water," she managed. "Please." He knelt and held a canteen to her lips. Cool water slid down her throat like mercy. She coughed on it, but he did not pull it away. "What's your name?" he asked. "Fiona." He nodded once. "I'm Declan Cooper. You got anybody waiting for you?" She shook her head. He looked at her a long moment, then reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a piece of dried meat and a biscuit. She ate slowly, her hands shaking. "I got a spread out north of Tombstone," he said. "Nothing fancy, but there's food, shade, and a roof. You can rest there a while." "I do not want your pity," she whispered. "It isn't pity," Declan said, standing. "It's kindness. You look like you could use some." She stared at his boots. "I will not be a burden." "You will not," he said simply. Then he helped her to her feet and lifted her onto his horse like it was nothing. He walked beside the animal, reins in hand, never rushing her when she slumped forward from exhaustion. His homestead was a low adobe house tucked between 2 red rock hills. A small corral, a lean-to, a garden coming in for spring. He had 2 horses, 3 chickens, and a dog with 1 ear. He made her a bed on the cot by the stove. He gave her clean water, hot food, and space. He did not ask questions. The first night she did not sleep. She stared at the ceiling and listened to the wind rattle the windows. The second night she cried. Quiet and raw, curled on her side with her fist in her mouth so he would not hear, but he did. He just did not say anything. On the 5th day she stood on the porch and watched him mend a fence. "You live out here alone?" she asked. He nodded. "Why, I was not always alone," he said. She waited. "My wife died 5 years back. Fever took her and our little girl. I buried them under the cottonwood tree on the ridge." Fiona looked toward the hills. "I am sorry," he shrugged, not unkindly. "It is the way of things." They were quiet a minute. "They said I was useless," she said finally, her voice low. "After my baby died, like I had nothing left to give." Declan did not look at her, he just kept working the wire. "They were wrong," he said simply. "You are still breathing, still standing. That counts for something." She watched him. The way he moved steady, patient, unbothered by silence. There was something in him that made her lungs loosen just a little over the next weeks she stayed, helped in the garden, fed the chickens, washed clothes on the rock by the creek. Declan never asked her to do any of it. But he always thanked her when she did. Little by little, color came back to her cheeks. The sun no longer burned her. Her steps grew firmer. She smiled once, and he had looked at her like it was the first real thing he had seen in years. One evening after supper, she sat beside him on the porch. The sky was turning gold and violet, the kind of light that made the land look almost tender. "I never thought I would feel anything again," she said quietly. Declan looked at her, his eyes soft. "You do now," she nodded. He reached over and brushed a curl behind her ear. His fingers were rough, but the touch was gentle. "I know what it is to lose everything," he said, "but I also know it does not have to stay that way." She turned to him. "I do not want to be alone anymore," she said. "You are not," he said. Fiona blinked hard, her throat thick. "They all said I was no good, that I had no place without him, without the baby." Declan shook his head. "They do not get to decide your worth." She looked at his hand, resting near hers on the porch rail. Slowly, she slid her fingers over his. He did not pull away. "I miss having someone," she said. "Not just the baby, everything." "I know," he said. "Me too." She looked up at him. "Do you think? Could there be more someday? A life, I mean, not just surviving." Declan met her eyes. "Yes," he said. "There can be with me. If you want it." Her breath caught. "I want it," she said. He leaned in, slow and sure, and kissed her. It was not rushed, just warm and certain, like a promise made in the last light of day. When they pulled back, Fiona smiled, a real one, small and full of hope. "I never thought anyone would want to build a family with someone like me," she whispered. Declan touched her cheek. "I will give you another family," he said. "If you want it, I will give you everything." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I do want it," she said. He held her hand tighter, and the sun sank behind the hills, casting long shadows over the porch, but neither of them moved. For the first time in a long time, Fiona did not feel useless. She felt wanted, alive, home. The garden rows were uneven, but the beans had started to climb. Fiona knelt among them, her palms dark with soil, fingernails crusted, the hem of her skirt damp from morning water. The sun was just brushing the tops of the mesquite trees, casting long slants of gold across the yard. She leaned back on her heels and wiped her brow with the inside of her wrist. Declan's hammer rang in the distance. She didn't look toward the sound. She could picture him clearly enough up on the barn roof, replacing shingles that had cracked and curled through the winter. She'd offered to help, but he'd only said, calm as always, "You've got your hands full with that garden." So she had stayed and set herself to coaxing life from the dry Arizona soil. The dog, old and slow-moving, had settled in the shade by the woodpile. One of the hens clucked irritably at a dust patch and fluffed its wings. Fiona emptied the last of the water bucket along a row of squash, then stood and stretched, her spine crackling like dry kindling. "You missed breakfast," Declan called as he crossed the yard, a quiet rhythm in his step. He carried his hat in one hand, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. "I wasn't hungry," she said, brushing her hands against her skirt. He stopped at the fence gate and tilted his head. "You always eat first thing." "Something wrong?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Just a strange dream." He waited. "The kind that stays with you longer than it should," she added, softer now. "There was a cradle, empty, but I kept hearing crying. I turned the house inside out looking for him, but all I found was a pile of blankets." Declan didn't speak. He opened the gate, walked to her, and set his hand lightly at her elbow. "Dreams don't leave scars," he said. She met his eyes. "But they know where the old ones are." He didn't offer comfort that would ring hollow. Instead, he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded paper square. "Mail came in from town yesterday. I meant to give you this sooner." She took it with careful fingers, unfolding it slowly. The paper was thick, the script formal. She scanned it in silence. "It's from the land clerk," she said after a while. "The claim's been approved." Declan nodded. "I didn't think it would go through." It did. Her fingers tightened around the paper. "I used my name," she said. "I know." She frowned slightly. "You didn't ask to be on it." "It's your ground," he said. "You earned it." She watched him, his face calm as always, but not unreadable. There was something in his stillness that made her heart pull tight. "I didn't know a man could be so quiet in his steadiness," she said. He gave a small shrug. "Not all good things come loud." She looked down at the letter again. "It'll take time to build anything proper. A real house, I mean. Not just boards nailed together." "We'll build it together," he said. That stopped her. She folded the paper carefully, her hands deliberate. "You want to?" He nodded. "That's what I meant, Fiona, when I said I'd give you another family. I didn't mean just something to fill the silence. I meant a home, a future, with me." She looked at him for a long time. Then she stepped forward slowly and laid her head against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her, steady and warm. The wind stirred the edge of her skirt, lifted the scent of cedar from the porch. After a time, she pulled back and said, "If I'm going to stay, I want to learn everything. About horses, fences, hay, all of it." "You will," he said. "And I want to plant fruit trees come fall." "We'll do that too." She took a breath. "And if it happens again, if I carry another child, I want to believe I'll be strong enough this time." Declan's eyes didn't waver. "You already are." That night the stars came out wide and bright, and they sat close together on the porch, her hand resting against his leg, his fingers loosely curled around hers. The dog dozed at their feet. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote cried once, then went quiet. She didn't dream of the cradle that night. When she woke, she rolled toward the warmth beside her and whispered his name just to feel the shape of it in her mouth. He stirred, then opened his eyes. "Are you real?" she asked him. "I am," he said. "And so are you." The morning smelled of sage and sun-warmed dust. She rose, washed her face in the basin, and tied her hair back with a strip of cotton. When she stepped outside, Declan was already hauling the feed sack toward the barn. She walked out to meet him, and when he turned, she kissed him. Not shy, not rushed, just sure. He smiled against her mouth. That was new. "I'm not the same woman you found by the road," she said. "No," he agreed, brushing her cheek with his thumb. "You're the one I want to build the rest of my life with." And she believed him. Not because he said it, but because he showed it in the space he gave her to become whole again, in the way he waited without pushing, in the quiet pride in his eyes when she stood tall beside him. By noon, they were mending harness leather in the shade together. By dusk, she was laughing at something he said about the stubborn mule, and by the time the moon stood high, she knew with a bone-deep certainty that she would never again be called useless. Not here, not with him. The wind carried the scent of creosote and warm dust across the ridge as Fiona stood beside the cottonwood tree at the edge of Declan's land. Her hand rested on the rough bark, eyes lifted toward the mountains in the distance, their blue shadows deepening as the sun climbed. Spring had leaned into early summer. The garden was holding, the beans climbing steady, and the hens had begun laying regular again. Declan's voice broke the quiet. "You thinking about putting the house up here?" She turned, shading her eyes. He had a post-hole digger slung over one shoulder, his shirt sticking to his back from the morning's work. "I was," she said. "It catches the wind just enough and the view doesn't feel so close around the throat." He walked to her, set the tool down and looked out with her. "Could put the kitchen window facing west, watch the sun drop while supper's on." "I'd like that," she said. He nodded. We'll start framing next week. I've got enough lumber milled and stacked. She hesitated. I've been thinking about something else too. All right. There's a widow down past the arroyo, she said. Name's Mrs. Hanley. She's got 3 little ones and no help since her brother took off for Colorado. I was thinking I might ride down, see if she needs anything. Declan studied her for a moment. That's something you want to do regular, maybe, Fiona said. There's others like her, not much left, no one to lean on. I remember what it felt like to have no one. I don't want to forget, he gave a slow nod. You go on then, take the sorrel. She's got a steady gait. Fiona smiled, a quiet curve of her lips. I won't be long. When she returned that evening, her dress dusty and a loaf of cornbread tucked under one arm, Declan was setting a kettle on the stove. He raised an eyebrow as she stepped in, and she set the bread down. She gave me that, Fiona said. Said she hadn't had anyone ask after her since last frost. That'll change, he said. Folks'll start seeing your worth. Fiona shook her head. I don't need them to see it. I need to know it for myself. He stepped close. And do you? I'm beginning to, she said. When I'm out there helping, I don't feel hollow. I feel like I'm giving something back. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. You are. Later that night, as they sat close by the hearth, she traced the edge of his hand with her thumb. You ever think about teaching someone else what you know? The way you handle the stock, the planting, the repairs. There's young men out there with nothing but fists and temper. They could learn from someone like you. Declan's brow furrowed slightly. I've never thought much about passing things on. You should, she said. Not all things should die with us. He was quiet a moment. If I did, I'd want to do it with you beside me. You will, she said. I'm not going anywhere. He looked down at their joined hands. I've got an old ring, she blinked. What kind of ring? Belonged to my mother, he said. Been in a tin box in the trunk under my bed for years. Her breath caught. Are you asking me something? He met her eyes, steady as always. I am. I want to build that house with you. I want to put my name beside yours at the church. I want to wake up every morning knowing you're mine and I'm yours. She didn't smile, not right away. Instead, she reached for his face, her palm warm against his cheek. I never thought I'd be someone's choice, she whispered. Not after everything. You're not someone's choice, he said. You're my only. She nodded once, eyes shining. Then yes. He rose, crossed to the trunk, and returned with a small silver ring, worn smooth at the edges but whole. He slipped it onto her finger without ceremony, and it fit like it had been waiting for her all along. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to. The next morning, Fiona walked out to the cottonwood again. The wind was gentler, the sky clear. She stood in the spot where the door of their new home would open one day, and she closed her eyes. She felt the land beneath her feet, firm and steady. She felt the weight of the ring on her finger. She felt the warmth of a life that was no longer just survival. And when she turned back toward the house, Declan was already walking toward her, a hammer in one hand, a beam balanced over his shoulder. She walked to meet him, step for step. The July heat lay thick over the land, and even the wind had gone still. Fiona wiped her neck with the edge of a damp cloth and leaned her hip against the porch rail, watching Declan work a length of timber into place across the frame of what would become their new home. The ridge behind him shimmered in the midday haze, and his shirt clung to his back in patches. She'd spent the morning stitching curtains in the shade of the lean-to, measuring the cloth against the window frames they'd marked out last week. Now, she watched him raise the crossbeam shoulders steady, movements sure, and felt the pull of something that had grown between them, quiet and deep-rooted. He caught her gaze as he stepped back to eye the line of the frame. Straight enough. You've got an eye for it, she said. He nodded once, then set the hammer down and crossed the yard. I've been thinking we ought to dig a proper root cellar before the heat ruins what we've dried." "I was just about to say the same," she answered. "There's a spot behind the coop where the ground stays cool." He tipped his hat back. "You always see things before I do." Fiona folded the cloth in her hands. "I used to think that made me troublesome." "Not to me," he said, brushing the dust from his palms. They stood a while with the quiet between them comfortable, the kind that didn't need filling. Fiona glanced toward the distant hills. "Mrs. Hanley's oldest boy helped me carry water this morning," she said after a moment. "Didn't ask for a thing, just wanted to feel useful." "Reminds me of myself that age," Declan said. "All elbows and grit." "He's quick," Fiona added. "I was thinking when the time comes maybe we could offer him some work. Teach him how to set a fence line, mend tack, all of it." Declan studied her expression. "You want this place to be more than just ours." She met his eyes. "I want it to be shelter for more than me." He nodded slowly. "Then we'll make it that." Fiona stepped closer, her voice low. "You ever think about what it would be like raising a child together, one that's ours?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quiet. "I think about it when I see the way you hold the neighbor girl's hand, or how you tuck the corners of the quilts like someone who remembers small feet." Her throat tightened. "I'd like that," he added. "If it happens for us, I'd want to raise them here." "With you?" She placed her hand against his chest. "I've been afraid to hope for it again." "Then don't call it hope," he said. "Call it building something new." The wind stirred at last, rustling the leaves of the cottonwood tree. Fiona turned her face toward it, then back to him. "I want to build that," she said softly. He kissed her forehead, his lips warm against her skin. "We already are." They worked until the light slanted long across the land. Fiona hauled stones from the creek to line the root cellar pit, while Declan set the first of the joists across the house frame. When the sun dipped behind the ridge, she lit the lantern and set it on a stump near the porch. As they sat down to eat, bread and summer squash with a little salt pork, Fiona watched the flicker of the flame catch in Declan's eyes. He reached across the table and took her hand without a word. "I want to marry you before the frost comes," he said, voice steady. "Not just speak vows, but stand before witnesses. Let the town see." She looked down at their joined hands, rough and calloused and sure. "They called me useless," she murmured, "said I had nothing left." He gave a small shake of his head. "They were wrong." "I know," she said. "Now I know." Outside, a coyote yipped once, far off. The chickens rustled in their roost. Inside, the quiet wrapped around them like a promise. Fiona leaned into it, into him, into the life they were shaping day by day with sweat and patience and the kind of love that asked nothing but presence. When she closed her eyes that night, she didn't dream of what she'd lost, only of what waited just beyond the next sunrise timber to raise, seeds to plant, and a hand that would always reach for hers. The church sat low and whitewashed at the edge of a dry wash, just far enough from town that the bell could ring without stirring the saloon. Its single steeple leaned slightly from wind and age, but the clapboard walls were sound, and the pews had been scrubbed with lye water the day before. Fiona stood in the doorway, her hand curled tight around a tied bundle of wildflowers she had picked herself: yellow primrose, pale blue flax, and one sprig of sage. Inside, the benches were half full. Not many had come, but those who had nodded toward her with quiet respect. Mrs. Hanley sat near the back with her 3 children, the eldest boy in a washed shirt and polished boots. The schoolteacher, Miss Elwell, had pressed a small woven ribbon into Fiona's palm as she passed, saying only, "For your hair." Fiona had tucked it in without looking at her reflection. Declan waited at the front, his shoulders squared, hands folded in front of him. He wore his best trousers and the same linen shirt he'd worn to his sister's wedding years ago. His hair had been combed, but the wind had already tugged a few strands loose. When she stepped forward, he didn't smile, didn't shift. Just watched her come to him like he'd known she would. The preacher said the words. They were clear and simple. There was no choir, no music but the creak of wood and the breathless rustle of skirts. "I do," Fiona said. Declan met her eyes. "I do." The ring slipped onto her finger without hesitation. The kiss that followed was brief, respectful, but his hand remained firm at the small of her back as they turned to face the room. No one clapped. It wasn't that kind of town, but there were nods. A few murmured blessings. And when they stepped outside into the sunlight, the breeze lifted the hem of her dress and carried the scent of sagebrush up from the wash. That evening they sat beside the house frame, now half raised, and shared a pan of cornbread and stewed beans under the open sky. The porch hadn't been built yet, so they leaned against the stacked lumber, legs stretched out, shoulders touching. "I never thought I'd feel steady again," Fiona said, her voice low. Declan reached for her hand, tracing the edge of her ring with one fingertip. "You are more than steady. I still have days where it catches me, out of nowhere, the ache of it," she said. "But then I look up and see you splitting fence rails or setting the kettle just the way I like, and it eases." He nodded. "The ache never leaves, but it doesn't get to rule us." She rested her head against his arm. "I want to plant cottonwood saplings along the ridge this fall, one for each year we're married." He looked toward the horizon. "Then we better find a good spot for the first one." They didn't speak again for a while. Around them, the land settled into its twilight quiet. Crickets began their songs. The stars came out one by one. By the time the house was finished, the first frost had touched the garden, and the hens had gone quiet in the early mornings. The root cellar held jars of beans and preserved tomatoes, and 2 sacks of flour waited in the corner by the stove. Fiona stood inside their new home, bare feet on the smooth pine floor, her hands brushing the edge of a hand-stitched curtain. The windows faced west, just as she'd wanted. The table held a small wooden carving, a gift from Mrs. Hanley's boy, shaped like a horse with uneven legs. Declan stepped in behind her, dusting off his hat as he closed the door. "You've been quiet today," he said. "I was listening," she replied. "To what?" "The sound of a place that finally feels like mine." He crossed the room and kissed the side of her neck. "It is." In the months that followed, the house grew full with the rhythm of shared days. Fiona taught the neighbor girls to sew straight seams and keep house accounts. Declan took in 2 farmhands, both younger than 20, both in need of steadiness and a hot meal at day's end. They worked the land together, built a pen for goats, strung new fence line past the cottonwood. In early spring, Fiona stood behind the house, fingers pressed to her belly. She didn't speak the thought aloud then. She waited, watched the clouds shift, listened to the wind in the eaves. That night after supper, she set her hand over Declan's and said, "You were right." He looked at her, puzzled. "You said we'd build a family," she said. "I think we've already started." He didn't answer right away. Just pulled her into his arms and held her, his thumb running slow across her spine. When the time came, she bore the child in the same room where they had shared their first winter. Declan caught the baby himself, hands sure, voice steady. A daughter, dark-haired and loud-voiced, placed in Fiona's arms as the sun lifted over the hills. They named her Lark, for the bird that sang at dawn. Years passed. The cottonwood saplings grew tall along the ridge, one for each year of their life together. The house weathered storms and summers, laughter and silence. Children ran between the garden rows, and Declan carved wooden toys in the evenings while Fiona read aloud from borrowed books. He never stopped looking at her like she was the start of his morning and the peace of his night. She never stopped reaching for his hand when the wind turned cold. Nothing forgotten. Nothing taken for granted. Only the steady, enduring life they had built. Rooted in loss, grown in kindness, and held fast by love that never had to shout to be felt.